This video is all about the catastrophic impact to the housing market happening right now. Now, as many of you know, I am in South Florida. And within South Florida, it is commonly known that we are in Hurricane Alley. And so unpredictable weather and hurricane, tropical storms, and all types of risks that are inherent in living in a tropical area, which is in Hurricane Alley, is to be expected. And so homes are built to be able to withstand those forces, and the insurance industry is set up to absorb whatever those losses might be. And full disclosure, this is not going to be a commentary on the insurance market in Florida, although I am doing a video today with an insurance expert to answer all of your questions and talk about the state of the housing market the home insurance industry within Florida, the regulations that have changed, things that are happening in the future, and how the competitive forces I suspect are coming back into the market and will bring pricing down. But that is not the topic of this video. Stay tuned because I will have that out later today. This is really talking about what happens when there is a catastrophic event, a black swan event that materially impacts the housing market, that materially impacts, and put housing market to the side for a second, that completely devastates a region and the people that live there and put their lives at risk. It's a terrible tragedy. I mean, toxic waste, fumes, fires, spills, train derailments, all of that is an absolute tragedy. And I'm not going to get into the political implications or some of the things that have been done to politicize this in a big way. I'm not going there. I want to talk about how this impacts the people that live there and potentially what the housing market looks like in the wake of those events. And the best way for me to do that is share an article that I am reading right now that I think you will find useful, because these are things that most people don't suspect are going to happen. Most people are not planning for a massive chemical spill that devastates the community, puts their lives at risk, their property values at risk, and everything else at risk. Most people are not betting on that happening anytime soon. Much like the people in Chernobyl were not expecting a nuclear meltdown. Just like the housing market in 3 Mile Island was not expecting a nuclear reactor meltdown. There are lots of things that can happen in the world that will have a negative impact on, obviously, the people who live there and housing values as a secondary concern. But secondary concern is what we're talking about today, because I'm really curious what's going to happen in that housing market. And I've reached out to some realtors that are located in that area to kind of get a feel for what they think is going on. And although they are obviously concerned, it's really not something that they're interested in talking about right now. There are bigger fish to fry. There are more pressing and pertinent things on their mind. And so I wasn't able to have a very detailed conversation about what the future could look like, other than they are very concerned. And in the future, I suspect I'll get more information when we can talk. Nonetheless, that brings me to NBC News, a news article that came out. When did it come out? Today? No, yesterday. And the title of the article is Ohio Derailment, What Chemical Spills and How Could They Affect Residents? Now here's where it gets interesting, because the residents of East Palestine have been told it's safe to return home. I don't know that that's true. And I don't know that I trust the people who are saying that it is safe to return home. But unfortunately, unless you've got the money and the ability to leave and live your best life elsewhere, chances are the economic reality of where you're at is going to preclude you from being able to do that. Chances are you've got to go back home. You've got to go back to work. You've got to go back to your life. And how safe is that? I don't think it's very safe right now. And I've read lots of different articles and heard lots of different things. But if I was in that area, I would be scared shit about staying there, given all of the unknowns that exist right now. So I empathize, and my heart goes out to the people who live there, their families, and the entire community, because yeah, you got to go back to work and live your life, but is it safe to do so? And that's what we're going to talk about right now, and I will then talk about what the future of that housing market looks like given this catastrophic event. Now, the article goes on to say that the chemicals that spilled were later burned near East Palestine, Ohio, after the February 3rd train derailment, and the chemicals involved include vinyl chloride, butyl acrylate, and isobutylene. Now, I don't know what those chemicals are. I'm not a chemist. I don't pretend to be, but I have seen lots of the pictures and lots of the video, and it looked like a nuclear bomb went off in that region. It looked horrible. I mean, there was a huge mushroom cloud, but the toxic fumes, the fire, the smell, the stench, the exposure that you have to all of this, I cannot believe is good for anybody. And it's scary. So I'm sure that the people who live there are terrified and they don't know what to do. The fear of the unknown is one of the worst fears that there can be. And right now, people want certainty in an uncertain time where you've got a chemical fire burning and all kinds of issues around that. How is this going to devastate the region? And then it goes on to say that scientists who do know more about this than I do, they know that these chemicals are terrible to the environment and to human health. And on the low end can lead to irritation of the eyes and skin, to breathing difficulties and cancer, raising major concerns about exposure and contamination in the wake of this incident. And so while one could say this is an isolated event that's limited to a hyperlocal area, while that might be true, I suspect it's very doubtful because these chemicals can move and these chemicals can contaminate. And how much area they will contaminate is yet to be determined, but this is not good for business for anybody who lives there. And so, as I mentioned, I reached out to some realtors that are in the area. That's their major concern. They're not really so much interested in what's happening in the housing market right now. They're more interested in knowing, are we safe? Are we okay? Is this something that is survivable, or is this something that we need to leave immediately? And I'm old enough to remember 3 Mile Island, and I'm old enough to remember what they were telling the residents at the time. And if I remember correctly, they were saying it's safe to stay there. It's okay. The radiation isn't a big deal. No harm, no foul. And it's business as usual. Go on living your life. No threat here. But unfortunately, that was not true. But I suspect the fact that there's going to be lingering exposure in the air, water, and soil, even if at low levels, is no bueno. And I would have to imagine that the question exists in everyone's mind who lives there right now is, how safe is this? I mean, for the love of God, look at this picture. It's horrible. It was a terrible tragedy. It is devastation. And these chemicals are known to be carcinogenic. They are known to be unsafe. They are known to be a problem. No bueno if you live there. And then it goes on to talk about the chemicals involved, which I'm not going to read about. I will include the link to this article and you can check it out. This is horrible. This is a tragedy. And look at this gigantic plume of toxic chemical smoke. Look at this. This is a major issue. And yes, the EPA is there. The EPA is the Environmental Protection Agency, and they say they will continue to do the right thing and test and monitor the air and the water and the soil. And that's great. I'm glad that they're testing. But in the interim, these dioxins stick to the particulate matter that was created during the burn, and they can settle onto people's properties or brought into their homes. And it's incredibly toxic if it's ingested or inhaled. And these chemicals are long-lived compounds. They do not break down easily. And in some cases, and I'd love to know what his definition of some is, they can be present in homes and in other environments for decades. And exposure at high doses can increase a person's risk of liver damage, or liver cancer, according to the CDC. But long-term exposure at low levels is also thought to have damaging health consequences. Obviously, this is horrible. Obviously, this is a tragedy. Obviously, there is an immediate need for help right now for every resident in this area. And I pray to God that they get the help that they need. And I pray to God that Norfolk Southern does the right thing and steps up in a massive way, along with every other agency that has the ability to do so, because this is a disaster and lives are at risk. And I hope it's clear, in no way am I minimizing that risk to human life. And I hope it's very clear that my heart goes out to them. I have tremendous compassion, and I pray to God that everybody who needs help gets it. But I'm also very curious, as a real estate professional, how will this tragedy impact the housing market and the local surrounding areas? But as a real estate professional, I also know that there is a form that must be completed by a seller called a seller's disclosure, which must be presented to a buyer, discussing all conditional issues about the home or property. And one of those questions talks about environmental exposure to chemicals. And while the particular chemicals that are named in this article that are cancerous are not named in my seller's disclosure, they must be disclosed. And the buyer must know what they're buying and what risks they are absorbing. So in Florida, if there was ever an issue in the property that we're selling that relates to flooding or water damage or roof damage or conditional issues with the home or insurance claims, there is a very comprehensive list of questions that must be answered in order to satisfy the legal obligation and requirement to ensure that the buyer knows exactly what they're buying. And in this instance, there's already been a major disclosure event because this is being covered worldwide everywhere. And so I suspect anyone who's looking to buy or sell a home in this area already knows that this thing has happened. But needless to say, this is a major disclosure that must be shared with anybody who is buying in this region. Which brings me to this article, which is titled, Fear of the Unknown. Will the derailment affect the real estate market in East Palestine? And it goes on to say that following the train derailment, the real estate market has been a topic of discussion for many. Many in East Palestine are concerned about the values of their homes. Will they hold up as hazardous soil is being removed, as the water and air is being monitored? And although residents are trying to get back to normal, some are still worried. A fully updated home, a move-in ready home, typically will sell first over the not so improved and dated properties. Well, that's true here too, says Wendy Perez, a realtor out of Canfield. And she goes on to say what I just shared, that in Ohio, it's required by the state for a seller to disclose the age of things like the roof or the furnace or mention any improvements or safety hazards. Right now, we don't know, Perez says. Fear of the unknown would be the biggest challenge that will probably stop the potential buyer. And then she goes on to say that she's unsure if the seller could be liable if a hazard comes up that they hadn't known about. And then she goes on to say that you can't disclose what you don't know. So that remains to be seen for the future. And as far as the price of a home in East Palestine, it's too early to tell. Now, to be clear, I don't agree with that at all. And I can speak from experience in Florida when a hurricane comes through, when there's devastation. And it definitely puts a great pause on the hyperlocal market that is impacted. But in terms of the impact or the economic impact to the housing market after a hurricane, while there is certainly a pause of demand in the near term, things pick up relatively quickly and it's business as usual. But the difference between a hurricane, which goes in and out very quickly, we're talking about a chemical spill that is going to have an environmental impact, certainly for the short term. And based on my best guess, I suspect it's going to have a long-term impact too. And I suspect that anybody who is thinking about buying a home in that area is going to have great pause before they absorb the potential risk of living in a chemical wasteland. And I sure hope that I'm wrong, but in the interim, I would be shocked if this housing market doesn't get devastated doesn't take a catastrophic hit. Yet to be determined, I don't know. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments down below. I hope you found this content valuable, and if you did, please subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up, share it with a friend, and check out my next video because I suspect you will love it a lot. And until next time,